Hello, welcome to the podcast Got Melanin, brought to you by the two lovely women from the UK chapter of WCAPS.
Hi all, WCAPS is an organization originally based in Washington, D.C. We work with women of color to help advance peace, security, and other international global issues. Here in the UK, we are focused on things specifically affecting women of color in the United Kingdom, but also make a commitment to global advancement of women of color.
Right on, because it starts where? At home.
Amen.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there is no better timing to have our first, UK WCAPS podcast, considering kind of like what's been happening these days, which is insane, but also very empowering, but also just like, what? Like, this is crazy.
Yeah, it's definitely that moment. And I think for me, originally being from Chicago, from the States, and now located over here in London, it has been such an impactful moment to not only know the experience of what is happening to African Americans in the States, but to be located outside the country and watching the impact that it is having on a global level and the things that it is starting to break down for Black people, both here and other places abroad.
Yeah, no, completely. And even I think, myself, I sound American because it's a huge enigma. Because I grew up there and stuff as well, like between New York and Miami. And it's been really interesting also to see how this conversation now is not centered around the United States as much as it used to be. And to be able to see kind of like the darkness of the woodworks in the West here in the UK and in France and like in other countries as well, that comes out. I say France because I'm French, so I think that's why it was relevant. But yeah, it's been kind of jarring to also see people there kind of being like, there's no such thing here. I'm like, well.
Definitely. And I think what's really important, and I think what's pertinent to the conversation that you and I are having, is that the message of what Black Lives Matter truly means is not lost in essence. I think there are a lot of people that are talking right now because they are outraged, as they should be, right, after viewing the video of George Floyd, but do not actually know that this is a movement that has been going on since, I believe, 2013, after the death of Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman was found not guilty. People genuinely decided enough is enough. The whole purpose of the movement and the organization Black Lives Matter in general is to eradicate white supremacy, not just in things like systems like the police force, but across the board. It's really out here to change the systemic disenfranchisement of African Americans in the United States. I think my favorite quote by like the Black Lives Matter organization is that they are unapologetically Black, period. They're all about affirming Black people, uplifting Black people, and creating a world where systemically we are not being disenfranchised. And I think that message needs to be clear, especially in a time like this when you see the media and other people that are new to this conversation attempting to either ignorantly or unknowingly change the narrative.
Yeah. I mean, I think of like what's been happening the last couple of days, and now it's been a couple of weeks as well. Yeah. As kind of like the truth commissions that are set up in like post-conflict zones where there needs to be like a societal healing after a very traumatic event that has either affected like the whole of the society or a specific group of it. And it's mad because I was like, well, if this is the truth commission of like, the 21st century kind of thing, when was the conflict that we'd be recovering from? And I'm like, well, it can't be since civil rights. It can't. And it basically, I realized that like we've been needing to do this since these past governments of ours up in the West, capital W, have decided that it was time to abolish slavery because apparently it was a crime against humanity. And yet here we are centuries later, and we're still fighting for that same kind of representation, that same kind of, we need that respect, to be shown that dignity that are shown to other members of the same society that we move in, which we're not awarded for no reasons other than what? It's just how things have always been.
No, that's exactly the issue. And I think you hit the nail on the head, right? For many people, the death of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery are your aha moments. Seeing incidents like Christian Cooper, that is your aha moment. For Black people in the United States of America, this is not an aha moment. This is what we have been experiencing since we were brought over from the shores of West Africa. All this did was bring to light something that people had not seen or refused to see before. It really takes me to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar did a piece, like in an op-ed in the LA Times, and he said something that I felt was so poignant and so on point for what this moment meant for people who are just joining this conversation. He said, racism in America is like dust in the air. It seems invisible even when you're choking on it until you let the sun come in.
Jesus.
One, thank you, Kareem. Thank you for being an athlete that never shut it up and dribbled. Thank you for all you have done. But also that is exactly what we're talking about. Black people have been in a burning building. They have been choking. They have been crying out that there is a problem. And this moment, whether it be what we've seen with COVID-19, where in America, as of March 27th, 23% of Black people were the ones that had died of COVID-19, but we're only 13% of the population. There is a systems problem, and now people are being forced to address it.
Right. And it always kind of like, even in those, you know, when you bring up a statistic like that, like you have some skeptical people that will be like, well, surely it's a biological thing, you know, why is it that so-and-so? And I'm like, well, it could be a biological thing, but continent of Africa, as far as we know, it's been doing fairly okay. So, you know, there was like all these, not even reports, but there was these like French academics that like public health academics that were wondering, you know, oh gosh, like why is it that the African continent is so not affected? Like Christ, well, geez, like, you know, there's things to look inwards before you start trying to see outwards, like what are they doing? You know, what are we doing at home, first of all?
Exactly. And that's the whole thing, right? For you to be simplistic and say there must be a biological difference between Black people and white people in all of these Western countries, because as you and I both know, here in the UK, Black people are also dying at a disproportionate rate from COVID-19. But really, as you just said, it's an inward thing, right? Why are Black people dying? Well, are they more likely to be the essential workers because they are doing what people previously deemed low work? Are they getting less access to healthcare in the States? Do we have things like hypertension and diabetes? Why is that? Are they living in food deserts so they're not getting adequate access to proper food? Education, you could really, are they the people that are in your prison system where you know you've got people confined in small spaces? We could go on, but all that continues to tell you is this is not a singular problem. We have a systems problem.
It's so sad that it takes an aha moment as just horrifying as George Floyd's murder to wake up collectively. And this is something that like I've been having conversations with my white friends about this, you know, and a lot of apologies mostly, which like
understandable.
Yeah, like I'll take them. Thank you. But you know, it is this question of like, why I can't believe that this is happening like this to that extent. It's been happening. We long before the idea of cell phones being an individual camera for people to hold, you had Rodney King's beating that was caught on tape, and the officers were charged just like the ones now for George Floyd. They stood trial, hopefully, like we'll see with George Floyd's murderers. Am I right? But the jury found them not guilty. But there was video evidence in 1992. Like, go tell me who the hell has like a camera that like they're just casually carrying around. Like it was the big ones that like you pulled out at family functions.
Sit on your shoulder.
Yeah, with the VHS tape, like inside, you know what I mean? So I'm like, wow, so this person cut this on tape, physical tape, and yet people found that these officers were acting within their rights. And that's where it needs to change. Like, I don't know about you, but all of these pledges that I've been seeing from various, cities in the US, like for instance, Minneapolis, that has vowed to defund the police so that they can no longer exert that same sort of power.
And they're going to disarm them, I believe. I believe that they're going to disband them as of recently, like 2 days ago, their city council voted to disband them.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, that's a recent update, you know?
Right. Coming out live with the updates. It's like, take it. Yeah, even in LA, like the mayor promising to, take out 150 million out of like the police budget that they get to reallocate towards, for the community. I want to think that this is, the pebble that gets the ball rolling and turns into something where we see less of police states, that are not recognized in the West like this. But at the same time, I don't, my skeptical brain, because we've done this so many times, and even though now it's as loud as it's ever been, I tend to go into thinking like, well, this is just for right now. Like realistically, I saw a figure that the LAPD police budget is in the billions. So 150 million, it's not much of a dent. It's like a reallocation of funds, which is great, but realistically, like, how is that going to fully affect the way in which the police in LA operate?
Well, this is a long time coming, right? The original reason for the police in the United States of America was to police slaves and prevent fugitivism. The reason that we had, like, when you think about things like the 13th Amendment, right, it's heralded as such a wonderful thing, which obviously because it got rid of slavery and involuntary servitude, but it also introduced the loophole that said you could effectively be a slave or indentured servant if you committed a crime and were a ward of the state, right? Wow. So there in itself, we created a system that said, you now belong to us if we can get you, trap you within this system. And from there, you pretty much allowed it to spiral. I think about Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, and she talks a lot about the cyclical caste systems that have run through America, from Reconstruction to Jim Crow to the civil rights to now this era of mass incarceration. And she pretty much outlines it, right? When we ended slavery, we saw Reconstruction and we saw Jim Crow. During that time period, we saw an increase of Black people being arbitrarily arrested if they could not pay the court fines, which obviously most of them couldn't. Then you suddenly were put in jail and you were a ward of the state. And that cycle kept going, right? The people that were getting prosecuted became younger and Blacker, I believe is a quote that she uses in the book. And that has never, ever stopped. America systemically has said, we do not want you here. When you think about things like the war on drugs, you just talked about the allocation of funds, right? 2/3 of the money allocated in the war on drugs went to policing.
Right.
Just straight up policing. We saw increases in the FBI drug budgets from like 8 million to 95 million across 4 years. We saw increases in the DEA from 33 million to 104 million between 1981 and 1991. In the meantime, we saw the National Drug Institute go from 274 million to 57 million. That tells you what people thought the problem was. The problem was not the drugs, which many will say were introduced into the Black community. And honestly, if you're talking to me, I'm 100% on that same train. But you did that. You created things like 3 strike laws.
Right.
Where you said on the 3rd time you get life imprisonment if 2 of your previous offenses were considered violent. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You equated 5 grams of crack to 100 grams of cocaine. That is socioeconomic. And you said both of those equal the same sentence, 5 years. Well, we know where the crack epidemic was, and we know where the cocaine epidemic was. And those are 2 very different racial issues.
Was there even a cocaine epidemic? As far as I know,
there was just high-powered white people doing cocaine at one point.
Yeah. I mean, also, that DEA budget, they had to increase that in order to keep flying back and forth from Colombia and Mexico. So, it's important in the war of drugs.
You know, it's one of those things, right? In 1991, one-fourth of the population of Black people, Black men specifically, was either incarcerated, on parole, or in some sort of legal battle. That really tells you, in my opinion, so much of what you need to know. So when people are pushing for things like defunding the police, it's because we've allowed our budgets for the police to be so big that we've defunded essentially things like education and healthcare. 18% of the US's GDP is committed to social services. There's 2 times the police budget in most places than there are in food stamps and welfare. That tells you why we need to defund the police.
Yeah. It's I always think of it as one of those where it's like, it's not even that you're fixing a problem that's not broken, but it's the whole issue of like, you know, if you're gonna, for instance, if you're going to allow guns to be legally sold somewhere, don't be surprised when people use it against each other, right? Because it's available and it's there. If you're going to fund the police to an insane amount and giving them all these powers, brutality will result from it. That's a fact. The Stanford experiment showed you exactly that. You could take peers and you give one of them a baton and you give the other one an orange jumpsuit. They no longer friends. Right? They're prisoner and warden or whatever the term is.
And the more you give people power, right? The US was very clear in the civil rights movement when they implemented qualified immunity. They were real clear. There has to be without a reasonable doubt that a police felt threatened, then we could not prosecute, then we could not charge. That still exists today. If they can prove imminent threat, and what is imminent threat, right? Because when we think about it, so many of the killings, I'm from Chicago, I think back to the case of Laquan McDonald. The original claims were that he was charging at the officer. He was shot 16 times running across a highway. Whose imminent threat? Breonna Taylor, what was the imminent threat? She was asleep in her home. You shot first.
No, that is the one where for me, like, because already Black women are not listened to, period. Like, let's be real. Like, I'm not even gonna compare it to nobody. It just doesn't happen, right? Because the moment we speak up and the moment we say what we need to say, the angry Black woman, oh, calm down, it's okay, la 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 la, we can talk about this without yelling. I've been talking about this without yelling. You're not listening to me. If yelling means that the attention will come, I will yell, which is why we've been seeing the protests to the levels that they have been. Like, talking, you know, people saying that like rioting is not the way, looting is not the way. I agree. However, like, you know, Target came out in support. So like, I'm not condoning that, but like rioting, I understand, because at some point you are frustrated and you are angry. And the only way to get that out for that to be heard is by making noise, you know?
Right? Rioting is the voice of the unheard, exactly like MLK said, despite the people that are trying to twist the narrative that he wouldn't want this. But let's take a minute to think about the looting you just said, right? Why are people looting? People are looting because you have put them in such a desperate socioeconomic situation that this win, getting this thing from this store, is so essential that this is the way that they feel like they can take power back in their space. I'm not saying that like, I get it. I get it. I'm not telling you it's good. I'm not telling you it's bad, but I'm telling you that you need to think about the level of desperation that people are feeling. Black people are tired. And we've been tired. For 400 years we were slaves, right? Then we've got another 65 years where it's like, oh, we started to figure it out, quote unquote, but then you burned Tulsa and you burned Rosewood. And then people say you got a Black president. Clearly there's no race issues. Look at us in 2020. Trump is saying things like, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Where are we in 2020? We are the same place that my parents talk about in the civil rights. We're in the same place my grandparents talk about when there was abundant levels of discrimination. Just because people are now more entrenched in their systems in disenfranchisement does not mean we are not in the same place.
Yeah, no, completely. But it is, I like this idea of people bringing up now, like, you know, leaders of the civil rights movements and of like kind of like Black liberation. one of my favorites personally, not my favorites because obviously they're all my favorites, but one someone that I always kind of like have looked up to in terms of their philosophy is Steve Biko, Bantu Steve Biko.
Retweet, same.
Yeah. You know, from apartheid South Africa. His murder, also, it wasn't no death, it was murder.
That was a murder, definitely.
Was the direct result of this same kind of policing and this same kind of literal systematic, which was also not hidden. Like their systematic racism was very much like
in your face.
I don't want to say that it was a prideful thing for the country or whatever, but like it was very much in your face, unapologetic. Like the way they were like, oh, you want to be unapologetically Black? That's fine. We're going to be unapologetically discriminatory. It is what it is, right? It happened. And Steve Biko's message was really just saying like, Black people, you are not this vermin, this thug that you are being told by white people in this country. You are not this like, you know, low life, no good like person. You are your Blackness, and like your Blackness is beautiful, and your everything about us and our culture and our history has been about survival and has been about defeating the odds and standing up to oppression. And you know, the fact that he brings up Black consciousness as like just part of his movement, like just be aware of your power as a Black person is so important. And I think that this is also something that like, it's not that it's not, you know, now, because it is, because we've got things like Black Girl Magic and Black Boy Joy and like all of these great ways to like support each other and show each other that like, we are not just this portrayal on the media. But at the same time, like, I don't know. It's just, there was something so, when I was reading about him and stuff, like there was just something that was so like, not even fatherly, but just familial. You know what I mean? With
no, I definitely hear you.
Yeah.
And I feel like you take me back, there's a Fanon quote, which I feel like is so important to like the moment that we're in. And he said, colonialism only loosens its hold when the knife is at its neck. Ooh. And right now, that is what, right? Thank you again. Shout out to all our good theorists, all these Black people. You have laid the groundwork. We are thankful for you.
Facts.
But that's where we are. We are putting the knife at the neck. We are saying no more. And we have learned there's so many things to take from so many movements of Black people across the world, whether we talk about apartheid South Africa, whether we talk about the Black Panthers, Malcolm X or Martin, whether we talk about Sankara or Lumumba or things like that happening back over in the continent. All of those people have laid the fundamental groundwork for this movement to exist and for this movement to exist at a global level. And I think that takes us back to here living in the UK. I genuinely believe, now being here for like 3 years,
Same.
now that the system's crazy. But I think the British, so much of Britain's systemic racism is rooted in the fact that they're like, look, we're not America. Like, we're not shooting you in the streets, but we still could talk about Nino Cardozo, Mark Duggan, Sarah Reid. Like, we can go on. We've got a list for you. But even outside of that, the systems which are continually disenfranchising people in the United Kingdom are also a problem.
Yeah. It is very much there's, you know, it's not one side or one place that's worse than the other. It's like the same levels, except that in one place it's louder than in the other. But it is very much, I completely agree. And I think one of the things, like, I don't know if you noticed this when you moved here, because I moved here from Miami. So like, for me, like the kind of, let's say, color scheme of society was one that was quite mixed, obviously predominantly like Cuban, Dominican and stuff. But it was one that was quite like, it was quite mixed. But still at the same time, you had very much like the white kids from universities that would stick together, the Latinos from Cuba that would stick together, the Dominicans that would stick together. Like, I didn't really see many Africans, like, to be honest with you. I didn't even really was able to like be a part of the Caribbean community because I didn't know anyone that was from the Caribbean, Christ, it's fine, we'll figure it out. learning every day. But, you know, I moved here and the first thing I noticed was how mixed people were, whether in their couples or with the children that they are having, or like people that I would meet at university here that were saying like, oh yeah, I'm part this, part that, da 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 da. And I'm like, wow, like this place is, yeah, you've got all sorts of mixes running around, like that's awesome. And then one day I was walking home from the library at night and I was walking with my white friend and some white guy was like gonna walk, like we were gonna cross paths basically. And he was wearing a hood so I couldn't see his face, but I could tell he was white. And he basically spat at the ground that I was about to walk on. By the time I lift my head back up to see what's going on, he's out here whispering in my ear, effing monkey mother effer. And my friend is next to me and she didn't hear anything. And that for me was like for me, that's like, I know it happened to me, so that's why I think of it that way, but it's whispered. It's literally so subtle that you could be the biggest ally in the entire world, like my friend. You could be the biggest ally in the entire world and you won't even hear it.
I think I honestly, first of all, no comment that is polite enough for this podcast on what happened to you. But second of all, I think you hit the nail on the head. Britain has, honestly, is pulling off the biggest heist across the board. Because their racism is so deeply and systemically entrenched that I think to a certain extent, a lot of people of color do not even realize that systems are stacked against you.
Yeah.
And when I think about things, let's just use the COVID-19 example. It's made public that people of color, especially Black people here in the UK, are dying at an exponential rate to their white counterparts in the UK for the same reasons that we are seeing in the United States. These are, in a lot of cases, they're immigrants in low-skilled jobs, quote unquote, as people would say, essential work as we should know now. They are the people that are in the streets. They are the people that are riding public transportation. They are the people that are in spaces that are smaller and less confined, and you have more people in a house. Why is that? These are all systemic issues. Even when you talk about who you're leaning towards, college versus A-levels, who should be doing vocation versus who deserves higher education, the systems are not working for them, or it's working exactly how it should. It's just not for you.
Yeah, completely. I think we should, it's frustrating because basically, like, I'm sure you've heard of this, but for those who are joining us today, there is the case which is being reported on, being not reported on. There's like a bunch of back and forth, but Belly Mujinga, who is a Congolese woman, or was a Congolese woman, may she rest in peace. I felt this particularly deep because my mother's Congolese, and therefore I am also Congolese, and thus it was not cool at all. She died on the 5th of April from COVID-19. 2 weeks before she died, she was spat at by a white man who proclaimed out loud that he was COVID positive and that he was sick. And the context in which she was spat at is because she worked at the London Victoria station. So she was a essential worker, right? And at the time, this was mid-March, late March that this happened. So government was going back and forth between who's an essential worker, who's not, who gets PPE, who doesn't, da-da-da. Meanwhile, telling the rest of us don't worry, stay alert, stay at home, wash your hands, da-da-da. Bro, I need more than this. You need to tell me that people are actually being protected out there, because there's no point in me staying at home washing my hands when there are people literally out there facing that every single day. Now, the British Transport Police has concluded that this was an incident, and that they actually interviewed the man afterwards, and they found out that he is in fact not COVID positive and he wasn't sick. He still spat in her face. That should be the biggest thing that's comes out of this. If he was in fact sick, that is not I'm not gonna be out here saying that he should be charged with murder, but I'm not gonna be against it. You know what I mean? The fact is that at the end of the day, she was the victim of an assault that you can paint it however way you want, there is a history of white bodies abusing Black bodies and getting away with it.
There you go.
And that should be the bottom line. Whether or not she died, whether or not he was sick, he spat in her face. It is not okay. And this is not an isolated incident, like all of this stuff. This happens straight up all the time. One of my best friends, who is also mixed, was spat at in broad daylight in London on her way home as she was walking with a friend.
Right.
Who is also like, who would fall in the like Bane category of like society, which that is a topic.
We will discuss that on another day.
For another day, because there is a lot to unpack even there. But yeah, it should just be assault. Like, I'm sorry, but it's not okay. And my friend, in the moment, you don't even think about like, oh my gosh, I need to go to the cops, because you are so shocked that someone would spit in your face or spit at your feet or call you names or anything like that, because we live in a society that apparently doesn't have racism anymore. That like, that's in the past. We have learned to like go from this. Look, there's people of color in all of these different positions and and oh, look at how they're doing and all of this stuff. Okay, and at the end of the day, society at large does not treat all of these Black and brown bodies the same. Just because now you've got one of them that makes you money by playing football or dribbling a basketball or like making money as a performer and like all of this stuff, giving you a good rep because look at the artist of color that I feature and look how good he dances, look how good she sings, like all of this stuff. It doesn't matter, because if we're not being treated on a societal level that reflects that same adoration for those who have made it in like the entertainment industry or like the sports industry or like, CEOs and stuff that have made it, which like kudos, because then you can't say that it doesn't exist anymore, because it does. It's just that now those that have this privilege of having a status and of having money and of having a platform are no longer, well, actually, sometimes they still are the victims of such things.
Mm-hmm.
John Boyega out here, people telling him, you're never going to work another day in your life.
Why? For standing up for what he believes in. For
as a Black
for
man.
Like Belly, for being a Black man and saying he's about it.
So you're never going to work again.
That's the whole point. And I think John Boyega is the perfect excuse. I think John Boyega was the wake-up call to Black people and white people both here in the UK and abroad, that there is a problem in this country. Because John Boyega was screaming about Belly Mujinga the same way he was talking about, the same way he makes arguments for people like Mark Duggan. We could go on, right? Mm-hmm. The cases that have never seen the light of day, we could go on. We could go on about the way that the British media talks about knife crime and the Black violence, knowing that most of your knife crime is not happening in these areas that you discussed, but that's too touchy for me to even go into.
Yeah.
But your systems are flawed, or they're working exactly how you want them to work, and they're working against Black people, and that is both.
That's why you don't want to change them.
Yeah, and that both in Britain and the United States. And I think it goes back to your earliest point, right? Where you're like, because we can see Black people in these spaces, that must mean we're past these systemic issues.
Right.
That's not true. No. And I think that's a lot of the reason that you're seeing more and more people jump on things like Jackie Ina's push for pull up or shut up. I want to see your leadership numbers. I want to see your board of directors. I want to see the breakdown of the people working in your company in medium positions, in low level. I want to see all of it. Because if you're coming to me saying, I'm in solidarity, I'm committing $500,000 to this cause, great, thank you, we're never going to turn it down. But you're then coming to me and telling me you're 3% Black, we have a problem. You have no members, no Black people on your leadership team. We have a problem. And that, I think, takes us back to the original point that we were talking about. This is a systems issue. While right now, we are discussing policing specifically, because we have had to watch, yet again, for so many of us, people pass away, people be murdered at the hands of white supremacy.
Yes.
This is the tip of the iceberg for Black people. This is the tip of the iceberg. I need equity in education. I need equity in job security. I need equity in healthcare. I need equity in housing. We didn't even touch on how things like the criminal justice system disenfranchise people, because there's honestly too much to unpack. But if you're listening to this podcast and you're trying to take something away, I think what we're trying to say is it doesn't matter if you're in the UK or the US. The systems are not stacked in your favor. They are working exactly how they should. And this is the moment where Black people across the globe are saying, we're tired.
Yeah. Yeah, because, sorry, no, keep going.
Oh, all I was going to say is we're going to dismantle it one system at a time.
Yes, sis, let's go. 100%. No, but yeah, it's exactly that. Like, and even in the context of like WCAPS and what we advocate, you know, the fact that we are tackling like these issues, which may be, you know, seem like local or like national, but ultimately extend on a global scale. If we start dismantling the way in which Black and brown bodies are viewed here, we can have serious effects on how they're treated in Africa, in South Asia, in like Southeast Asia, even in Latin America. We can have actual effects on how we don't have our origins, our original places, or however you want to say it. Trying to be so PC, but like it's so hard because I'm just really angry. But you know, like we will no longer be subject to being like, oh, poor Africa, gosh, send money to them, the poor things. Excuse me, we got wealth. It's just being taken from us, from the corporations that are based here, that enact laws so that they can fully take advantage of the resources that our continent holds, which makes us so damn special. But like,
one more time for the people in the back.
Facts. But it's you know what I mean? Like you start, it's a question of like, if it starts here, it can't be perpetrated elsewhere.
Exactly. And that's the colonial hand, right? We discussed that. That is your ideologies are coming from the colonial hand. And so much of what this podcast will continue to do in the future, what we as an organization stand for, is creating the spaces, putting people of color in the room to implement systemic change, advocating on the behalf of people who have been silenced for way too long. Saying that whether we be in positions of power politically, whether we be in positions at the grassroots level, it does not matter. Our voices need to be heard. And we're making a commitment to show you that we operate in a lot of different spheres. And we have a lot of things to say about each one of them. I don't care if we're talking about nuclear weapons. I don't care if we're talking about space and aeronautics. I don't care if we're talking about legislative policy change, both at a local and a global level. These are all things that we're going to attempt to discuss, attempt to tackle, the content that we're going to continue to put out. But it's because we're in this space and we will no longer be silent because we have things to say. Amen.
Couldn't agree more. And it needs to happen. And if, you know, we're not here to educate. That's one thing that needs to not happen. We're not here to educate, because if you have access to the internet to go on Twitter and be all mad and like go on whatever sprees, you have the same ability to look into that question and to look into like what you can do in order to positively like affect and change the system as well alongside us while we continue to campaign and everything. But on the topic of changing the systematic oppression, really, do you think it's better to like defund a police institution or system, or rather reform it?
We're asking the hard-hitting question.
Well, yeah, because I frankly thought about this myself, and because, you know, you've been saying like we said, Minneapolis is straight up like
defunding and disbanding
it. LA is more like trying to reallocate funds. I'm sure we'll see other cities come through with like proposed reforms to hiring methods, training methods, and that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know exactly, like, I can't make my decision on which I think best. I think I would maybe go more with like reform, just because I am a strong believer that like if we're gonna make laws that we can twist and whatever, then we need to make laws that we cannot twist and that will explicitly say Black on, like, you know, on paper that like none of these sorts of things will never be tolerated ever again. Yeah. Like you will be fired if it results in the death of so and so, like, and unless you have proof that you were in danger, rather than trying to prove that like you weren't if you have proof, concrete proof that you were in imminent danger, do you know what I mean? Like what's your take on this?
I hear exactly what you're saying about reform. And to be honest with you, I am sitting closer to the side of defund, but I also believe that there is a space, and a necessary part of defunding is reformation.
Right.
And that's where I'm sitting, right? So I think that there are cities like my own, Chicago, New York, LA, a lot of the major cities, because America is militarized, and we know that, where you have the space, you have the funds that need to be reallocated into communities because not having quality education, not having access to jobs, not having proper housing, those are things that are playing into the way that society is playing out, and that the way that these systems are being reinforced, because you're automatically criminalizing people just purely based on what they do not have. Yeah. And so I think there is a place for defunding, because we do need that reallocation. We genuinely do, just to even make it a more equal and level playing field for people, and to empower communities. There are statistics that show empowering communities, you will see a decrease in some of the things that you're seeing.
Yeah.
But I think the defunding without reformation is not a smart move, because I think exactly what you just said, you need laws that are, once you have defunded, that are very clear and very codified, that cannot be twisted. I need things like qualified immunity on a large scale to not exist anymore. That's simple, because there should not be a difference between whether you are wearing a badge or not on whether you should be tried with murder. That makes no sense. So I need things like that removed. You know, we just saw in New York that they got the chokehold ban passed. And I think that that's a step, right? That's a step in the right direction. But I think that, coupled with things like defunding the police and reallocating back into those communities of color, is only going to strengthen exactly what we're doing. I don't think that you can sit here. I think there are a lot of people that are going to sit here and say, disfund, disband, full stop. And I hear them, and I hear that argument. And to a certain extent, I agree with why you feel like that, because policing in its system and the way that it's created, it was inherently created on a bad system that does not affect Black people in a positive way. So yes, I wholly hear that argument, and I understand why you're coming from that place, and I get it. But if I'm being a realist to a certain extent, based on who is in power and what I can actually get done, then yes, I definitely want police systems defunded and funds reallocated. Because let's be real, you've been defunding the education system for time. What is so important about police carrying why do police need military grade weapons to police communities? There's no reason. We can defund that. We can move those funds genuinely.
Question for
and it goes back to like the good bad apple theory, right? There are people out here that are like, there are good cops. Well, keep that same energy as Black people, right?
There's good Black people.
Keep that same energy. But also, nobody is saying there are not good people who are cops. That is not the argument. But policing in itself is flawed.
Yeah.
Policing in itself, the system in which it operates, is not benefiting Black people.
Yeah.
And that is a problem. And that system needs to change. And I think the combination of those two things, fine. If we can get the reformations passed quicker, then start doing that. But also, do not stop forcing cities, forcing mayors to have the difficult task, which honestly isn't that difficult, of reallocating and defunding police.
Yeah.
Because it's only going to better serve the communities.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, what was the figure? They had no money, no funds, no nothing, no way of curtailing COVID, right? It was a question of stay at home and whatever, until white people wanted to get their haircuts, and then that was, possibility to reopen, who knows. But when it came to squashing down the riots and the violence that was taking place in the streets of Minneapolis, they got $100 million to just whip out of a magic hat for that. Like, oh, so you've been having money, actually. Like, you had this money the whole time, but clearly it was saved for a rainy day.
You use it for what you want to use it on.
Yeah.
We already talked about Faines. The knife is at the system's neck. You're now going to throw everything you have at it. It's the same reason that it was totally cool for all of those protesters to be up at Capitol buildings and think places like Michigan with AK-47s talking about reopen my stores. But it's not okay for Black people to peacefully protest, or I don't even care, not peacefully protest for their lives. And for systemic change. That in itself is the issue. And I think when we talk about things like defunding the police and steps to take, I think people need to realize these are going to be, this movement is not going to be 2 weeks, okay? No. So for everybody that's sitting up here like, oh, can things go back to normal? No, things cannot go back to normal, because normal is what's killing Black people.
Yeah. No, completely agreed. And even before the wave of BLM protests started, when people were like, I can't wait for things to go back to normal. You want to go back to normal to a government that will prioritize like businesses and will prioritize the state of the economy rather than the state of national health care and its services. Like, that's also not normal whatsoever. One thing that I've absolutely learned from all of this is that the baseline for any sort of like society, for your economic prosperity and all of that, stems from like, do you have a population that's fit to work? Do you have a population that can actually carry out these things? If you don't ensure that baseline of healthcare and health management and making sure that people can actually get the services that they need when they need to, you're ultimately reinforcing a system where you're going to have unnecessary deaths that are going to be covered up by some sort of like societal theory of like, oh yes, well, it's been, X amount of years since this thing happened, and therefore it only makes sense that now all these people are dying, and it must be something genetic. Like, no, stop. You know what I mean? Like, even in the one thing that has, in the UK, I guess it's like, yes, they absolutely police here as well, not to the same level as the US, because the US, they're granted like literal lethal weapons to use. But it is still done here in the same way of like the stop and searches and like the random the random stops and search, the way in which like people are treated in detention centers. So it's not even jail, it's literally just in terms of like waiting to hear on your like immigration status and like your legal status in the country. And I think I was particularly, I guess I was woken up to like the systemic racism that exists here in the Windrush scandal, which, for those who haven't heard, is a scandal that's resulted from like an entire generation of people who had been literally asked to come and move to the UK from the Caribbean and other parts of the Commonwealth by the Queen, like after World War II, come and rebuild the great motherland, when it's like, whose motherland?
That's the language that's used, though.
It's like, who, if you're from Barbados, if you're Bayesian and you're telling somebody that like, oh yeah, the UK is your motherland. Oh no, but that's a different topic for another day. Yes, exactly. But basically like all of a sudden now you had, so between 1948 and 1971, you have literal like hordes of people that came to the UK on an invitation and were told that like, well, yes, basically you get like the indefinite leave to like remain in the country, like it's as you wish, thank you for doing all of this. But since 2012, under like the conservative liberal Democrat coalition, which also we just need to get rid of political parties, but that's another conversation.
Another conversation.
Another day. All these bookmarks being tapped. But under this government, there was the like hostile environment policy, which was put in place when it came to like immigration in the UK. And basically this policy is possibly the most British thing I've ever heard in my entire life. But it is to create an environment where migrants will voluntarily leave because this living in the UK becomes like hard. And therefore like they will leave themselves. So it's not a way of like kicking people out. It's basically putting laws and benchmarks that make it that at some point you, migrant, won't be able to renew your visa, or you won't be able to do anything, and you will leave because that's your only option left. The most, like, the politeness in it is just ridiculous. Like, I can't.
That's a perfect example of Britain's systemic racism. That there you go.
Perfect.
And in the women scandal.
This policy was like Theresa May's like baby, right? So she was like so proud of it and like all of this stuff. And so it started basically that enforced, like, that policy was what was able to enforce all of these like immigration raids that we've seen happen, where like you have had people that have died or have been like severely injured to the point of no return from these raids, and how the police was handling them during these raids. These, you know, this policy also made it that like you had enforced identity checks done to the NHS by landlords and by banks and stuff, like, in order to make sure that anyone using these services had to prove that they were like a resident in the UK. So you're setting up a system that is literally policing people's status, but you're putting it under the veil of like, but this is only, you know, this is just how we want to live in this country. Like, if this doesn't fit in your way of life, like, we're really sorry, but the door's over there.
Doesn't matter if I've lived here my whole life because my parents moved over here.
Right. And so now you have in 2013, people of the Windrush generation that are getting letters claiming that like they have no right to be in the UK and that they need to leave.
Papers.
Now they're being called illegal immigrants. And they're losing their jobs, their homes, their benefits, their access to the NHS, all things that like either they would have literally helped build themselves or like their parents would have helped build, right? You have people that have been sent back to their countries that literally have never set foot in said country, that have been born and raised in this country, that are British through and through, but they happen to be what? Black. And thus they gotta go. It makes absolutely no sense. The policy, right? It just to, again, like highlight, like not even how, it's not even to highlight how absurd it was, but just imagine you're in that situation, right? Landlords and business owners at that point, if they didn't comply with these policies of like doing like identity checks, you were facing a fine of up to like 10,000 pounds. So now you're enrolling people to be complicit in this situation by holding them financially hostage. You're inciting people to join in on this, to look at someone and go, I wonder if he's legal. I wonder if she's legal. I wonder if, okay, all right, we'll check later. Like you're enforcing this kind of system and you're enforcing this way of thinking. And that's how you got kids on playgrounds coming up to like little girls in veils talking about you should go home back to your country and all this stuff.
That people think that acts of immigration are only Trump screaming, build the wall.
No, it goes so much deeper than that.
It goes so much deeper than that. And I think one, exactly what you just said, even just seeing here in 2019 and 2020, the class action lawsuit that they're trying to file to save people from being deported back. They're asking people for papers that why would they ever have them?
Yeah.
And it's so reminiscent of things in the States, like when they burnt down courthouses so people don't have marriage licenses or birth certificates. You know, I'm talking about generations ago, paperwork just lost. Well, how are you going to register to vote if you don't have these things? You're just going to keep putting in systems in place that say you don't matter here.
Yeah.
And for Black people, I think if we're learning and looking realistically at the systems that we have in front of us, we are consistently reminded, this is not for you.
Yeah. Like you are lucky to be here, kind of.
Yeah, you should be grateful. And I think whether you are a part of the Windrush, pre-Windrush generation, a benefactor of that as a Black person here in the UK, or an African American in the States, I think it's really important for us to remember we built these countries. You can't tell me to go anywhere because I built this space.
Yeah.
And we are sick and tired of you trying to, in the States, trying to treat me like the Constitution's 3/5 of a person. I am not. We are not. And this would not exist if we were not here. I really love that people have been on that, have been saying things like, you know, love us as much as you love our culture.
Yeah.
It's real clear who's running these systems.
Mm-hmm.
And when people are using their legislative power against you, you get to a point where you're not going to take it anymore. When you're physically being brutalized, you get to a point where you're not going to take it anymore. And that's the moment that we're in. And I'm hoping, because I am an inner skeptic and I am a little bit cynical, that we don't let this moment pass, that we hold people to account, that all the people that jumped on the bandwagon because it was cool to put a black square up to say Black Lives Matter, there's a lot more work that means we're changing these systems.
Yeah. No, completely.
And that's the work that has to get done.
Yeah. And it starts with what? Educating yourself.
Amen. Which is why we know you tuned into this podcast to learn something.
Like, you're welcome. I'm getting carried away now. I'm like, I'm not a teacher, but
we're definitely not teachers. We're literally having a conversation between two people who are passionate and attempting to be well-read and well-researched. But do your own research, like you said earlier.
Yeah.
And do not rely on your Black friends to explain to you everything that's going on right now. Mm-hmm. That's not the way to step into this conversation.
Facts. And I think it is just like, especially us as you know, we've seen, like, you definitely more than I have, because I lived a very sheltered, cute, white European life for most of my life. So, you know, for me, it was just like, oh, trauma stories that, I couldn't even, it's not that I couldn't relate to, but like, I came into contact with my Congolese side when I was 19. Mm-hmm. And before that, it was very much just kind of like an explanation for my color rather than a part of my identity. Mm. And so, so I think, you know, our perspectives, like in this context as well, we can see the parallels. Do you know what I mean? Like, we can see the way in which that, while in the US, it is very outward how they cut budgets, target, police, imprison, disenfranchise openly. Here it's done in a way where every racial incident is a tragic incident. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, oh, out of our hands. Like, it happened. Gosh, people are bad, which is why we need the police. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's the same thing. I was going through this. There's this page on Instagram that's called Manchester March, and that is the one that has been like organizing, like, you know, most of the stuff with BLM in Manchester. And they recently posted like photos of those who have fallen in the hands of the British police. And all of these situations have been marked as like tragic incidents. The 12-year-old Somalian girl, also outside of Manchester, that was drowned by some of her classmates.
Shukri Abdi. Shukri Abdi, that's who that is?
Yeah, Shukri Abdi. Yeah. Thank you for the name. I had Shukri, but I was so heated that I was like, she died. But
I hear you.
Yeah, she literally, like, her death as well is also being reported on as a tragic incident that will be investigated into further. We spent how many years looking for Madeleine McCann?
I heard 13.
13 years. 13 years. Now that we have BLM, what did they pull out the other day? Oh, well, it seems as though we may have a suspect in the Madeleine McCann case. Worry about Shukri right now. Her family is grieving the loss of their eldest child.
Still a year later. You're starting now. It's a year later.
12 years old. And she died. And you're still out here investigating the disappearance of a 3-year. Like, I'm not saying that one is sadder than the other in it. It's children at the end of the day. But come on. Like, it's a question of what's happening right now in front of your eyes. Would it really be the same? And this is a question that I think I'm just going to pose to our listeners and those who want to get involved in the conversation. Do we genuinely think the same things would happen if these were white bodies that we were talking about? Would those who have still not been rehoused from the Grenfell fire, Would they still be without a home right now if they were white? No.
No.
My answer is no, because they're still like, it doesn't make any
sense. The same question, right? Would we still be waiting for the police that killed Breonna Taylor to be charged if she was white? Would we still be marching in the street for her? Or just charges, not convictions, charges?
Isn't her boyfriend still in jail as like the suspected?
I think all of the protests and everything and funds got him the lawyer to get those charges dropped. But for people who do not know, when they went in with this no-knock, I believe it's a no-knock warrant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a no-knock warrant, which effectively means you can go into somebody's home without knocking because you have a warrant or you have a suspicion that somebody may have done something.
Yeah, they didn't even have a warrant. They just had a suspicion.
Yeah, shoot first, ask questions later. And of course, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend was a legal carrying gun owner, and he thought somebody was trying to break into their house. So of course, he bore arms, like the Second Amendment that everybody screamed so loud about, but the NRA was nowhere to be found when his Second Amendment rights were trampled on.
Right.
And he was charged, I believe, originally with attempted murder he was at least charged with a felony for shooting at the police legally in his home when they killed his girlfriend.
It's ridiculous.
The things that we have discussed here, and I think Melina posed the perfect. Also, we never introduced ourselves. Melina, okay, you know now. I think Melina posed the perfect question. Would we even be forced to talk about any of these issues, both the ones that you are watching on video, the protests that you're seeing? Because as we know, protesting and looting and rioting is cool when hockey teams win championships, not cool when Black lives are dying in the street.
Facts.
Would we be having the same conversation about systemic injustices? Would we not be changing public health care systems, access to education, job security?
Yeah.
If we were talking about white bodies.
Yeah.
And that alone in both the United Kingdom and the United States is the problem. That is why we are screaming Black Lives Matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And I urge, those who are listening who may be white or like, white males, white men, white women, white whoever. If you're listening and you're sitting there going, well, I hear you, I understand, but at the same time, like, why can't I be proud in who I am as well? Why can't I be proud in my heritage? Because look at your heritage. Look at the historical context in which it exists. There's no white pride day because your white pride exists in your laws, in your systems, in your constitutions, in your legislation. That's why. White pride existed in Bristol up until like 3 days ago before they tore down the statue of Colston. You know what I'm saying? That was white pride, just right then and there. No one is saying that it is bad to be like, if this is what you take out from the conversation that we're having right now, then you ain't been listening.
Yeah.
No one is saying that it is bad to be white or this, or all white people are this, that. It's a question of like taking a moment before advancing forward into your life, realizing who you are, where you stem from, and looking back and seeing how the history of the country or like of even your family, how they existed in that space and how it's made it so that you're at the point that you are today.
Yep. And I think to piggyback off that point and really just drive it home, it's to those people that are sitting here and going, well, why don't all lives matter?
Hey,
that's not what we're saying.
It is not.
We're saying that Black Lives Matter right now because we are being killed. We are being murdered in the streets. And I am not just talking about watching the death of somebody. Systems are killing us. It's like nobody was mad when people were clapping outside for the NHS at 8 p.m. Nobody said, you should clap for me too. I'm staying indoors. We all are important in this fight against COVID-19. Yeah, we know. But our essential workers, our doctors, our cleaners, like the healthcare system that is propping us up during this pandemic, whether we be here in the States, they are doing the work. We are acknowledging them right now.
Facts.
We are acknowledging that Black people are dying right now.
Yeah. That was a perfect ender, my friend. That was.
Oh man, you really just got it going. I'm just piggybacking.
Oh, well, it was a joint effort, wasn't it? Like, Maria and I have low-key found out that we are like the ultimate dream team. So every day is excitement. But speaking of being a dream team as a part of the UK chapter of WCAPS, what is coming up on June 24th?
We are doing some fun things on the internet and launching to you, the people. Our organization is coming to you live from Zoom with an important event.
Yeah, exactly. We'll post the links to the Eventbrite, and which, we don't want to give too much away. So all of the information is available on the Eventbrite page, which can be found on our social media.
Which will also be linked for you.
Which will also be linked for you, obviously, of course. And yeah, we're very excited. We have an exciting panel of speakers, and it's looking to be a good event, and I'm very excited to I'm ready to get to work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we'll definitely keep you updated. If you follow us on social media, if you want to hear more, I'm sure we'll give you more teasers over the next few weeks before we launch on June 24th. But from myself, from Melina, from all of the other board members, this is our first episode, but we hope that you will stick with us as we continue to go on this journey and talk about these important topics. Because if we're not having these conversations, then none of us are going anywhere. Yeah. But I'm Mari.
And I'm Melina.
Thanks for coming to Got Melanin.